It's the Lekker Rugby Pod, only on Megaphone Rugby.
Preview of the Six Nations weekend, a big game coming up. That's probably the title decider. Might be the title decider, might not be. Harry, welcome back, and tell us where you are dressed so fancy. I've never seen you like this. Almost didn't recognize you.
I had to give a speech today to a bunch of London solicitors and barristers and business leaders. I'm not in London, but I delivered it, and you're talking to the Brits, you have to get dressed up.
Okay. Well, talking about the Brits, we're going to talk about the English side a little bit right towards the end, and Scotland, Wales a little bit. But this focus of this specific podcast, a shorter one than usual, is going to be on the big game, Ireland versus France. So let's start cracking. What do you think? What can we expect? We saw the teams being announced now. One or two surprises, but some big names back for France, back to full strength. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, so maybe the top 3 or 4 points are that the French have named a 7-1 bench. They haven't named a Rassie type 7-1 bench, so there's no Quagga Smith, Dion Ferry, Michael Hooper, Artie Surveyor types. It's big boys. It's a 901 kilogram bench.
Jeez.
Let that set in. 901 kilograms has got to be the heaviest bench ever named in Tier 1 Test rugby. It's peopled by Cyril Bay, Julien Marchand, Aldigueri, Emmanuel Miafu, who's 145 to 150 kgs, depending on when he weighs in, and then big boys. And one of the big boys is going to have to be the key here. They do have a pretty quick flank, who's named Jigu, and then also Aradu. They're about 100 kg kind of guys. So I guess they're playing the part of the Quagga or the Dion Ferry, but it's difficult. You always gameplay this, right? So if Yoram Moafana, the number 12 for the French, goes down early, then who slides over to 12? Late in the game, it's easier because you kind of anticipate that. But if it's early in the game, your number 12 going down is a big problem. Intermac just back from injury. Is he really a 12? Can he take the heat from Bundyaki? Maybe you slide Dupont over to 12. Maybe you do none of those things and you save your back reserve, who's Luku. You save him by putting Movaka, the hooker, who's really agile and dynamic, as we remember from the quarterfinal. Put him at 12, and you just smash him into Aki for a while until the dust settles. But the early injury to a back is the real issue. We suffered the early injury to a hooker on a 7-1. We experienced that. But there's nothing like dropping a midfielder when you have Sam Prendergast that you want to explore on defense. So you're ramming Moafana in there. What if Moafana catches the injury doing that, and suddenly all the power goes back to Ireland on their bench? So the 7-1 has always been a gamble. Rassie was clear about that. If you watch the discussion in Chasing the Sun 2, Felix Jones, instrumental there, talks about how the 7-1 did work against Ireland, even though the score was 13-8. This is the danger of people who are reductionists and say, oh, we lost the game, it didn't work. It did work. The game was lost despite the fact that 7-1 worked, because you had a maul held up, not clearly available, on the actual try line of Ireland to win. Ben O'Keefe couldn't find it. Damien Dialende did find it. Whistle goes, game lost. Don't focus on the 8, which could have been 15. Focus on the 13. How many times has Ireland been held to 13? So Felix Jones's point was, we didn't pull off the execution of it quite right, but the concept was there. So it's attractive to the French to say, what if we can hold the Irish in their home patch below 20, below 15? Then we back our odds to win on superior artillery, infantry. Everyone can empty their tanks because they know that we have 7 forwards. The maul drive, just run, line out, maul, drive, line out, maul, drive. Win advantages, win penalties, win a card. Also have fractured field from which Dupont, Intermac, and others can create, but using that floating aircraft carrier. So that's the big point of 7-1. Second point is that the Irish have had to do some scrambling themselves. So Jamie Osborne comes in on the wing, on the right wing instead of Calvin Nash, a more natural like for like. With Mac Hansen not recovering from injury, now you've got a big boy back into the back three, and so you're anticipating long kicks from the French, which brings up a subpart is these two teams are very stubborn. The French doesn't really deviate from what the French does, right? We long kick, we're monsters, we're big boys, we're gain line stoppers, and we don't deviate. It's literally why they lost to England, because they refused to stop kicking long to a shaky 15 Marcus Smith, who was still learning 15. They should have had contestables, grubbers, bouncing ball, but they never did. So Ireland has basically said, we know you're going to keep kicking long. That's one of your doctrines. So we're going to pull back a fullback wing and who's long, and so he can win in the aerials. So that's their only concession to this matchup. But they've had to bring on Thomas Clarkson into the bench as a prop. And then you go up to the top line, you see that it's Finlay Bealham starting at tight head. And then you realize how much Ireland misses Ty Furlong, one of the great props of his generation. He's their Franz Malherbe. And beyond that, he handles. But just talk about set pieces right now. Ireland has a wobbly scrum. Andrew Porter on his day can leak 3, 4, 5 penalties. He's done that in Irk, and he's done that on test level. He did it most recently at the highest level when England was red carded 90 seconds into a game at Twickenham. All was lost, but no, it wasn't, because Andrew Porter was pinged 5 or 6 times at scrums. And 5 or 6 scrums penalties equal a card. I mean, it's the same. So look for the French to really target the Irish scrum. On the French side, you have Gros, Movaka, Antonio coming on in the front row. Then you have Marchand, Bay, and Aldegheri. That is a proper scrum examination. I bet you anything that they've been doing extra scrum practice, extra angling, anticipating that the Australian ref, Angus Gardner, a whisper in the ear, a repetition about Andrew Porter's angling, knowing that Gus Gardner is not going to be so keen to give scrum penalties because he's Australian. But if you can precondition a ref that you're about to see that, it can help. The third big talking point, I think, is that this game has been billed from the beginning of the year as the clash, as the big one. So you always wonder, is it going to be a dud or is it going to deliver? I say this one does deliver, even if there's not a lot of scoring, because I think the tension is going to be so high. I think the French are playing off an insulted kind of mood. They feel like they've been, that the England loss was sort of a fluke. They've been written off. But if you look at all the metrics, year on year, year to year, French are way up. Irish are down. And so this is one of those proverbial banana skin peel games at home where you think that home crowd fating the ride into the sunset for Peter O'Mahony, Conor Murray, and Cian Healy can boost emotion. Every study I've ever read about emotion and heightened emotion before a game is it actually saps energy, and it can sometimes interfere with decision making. You come in too rip-roaring, you're too inspired. It's why all those Centurion games and 50 games seem to sputter for players, and they get carded in those games, or something bad happens. So you can almost play too much in the anthems. Every study I've seen about adrenaline factors and performance for the All Blacks is they would be better off not having the haka. The haka actually diminishes the performance for the first 5 minutes. It's the All Blacks play better at minute 35 when all that adrenaline's been out of the system. It points out this remarkable feature of elite sport, which is the calm one wins. The one who executes under pressure wins. The one who, that fire helps you more at the end of matches. But in the first 10 minutes, first 15 minutes, you better be exactly on your game. Your bind has to be correct at the scrum. Your lift has to be perfect at the lineouts. Your throw has to be perfect. And so it's interesting to see who will be affected more by the emotion, the tears, Peter Omani crying, that always gets us, the big tough guy crying. And is it the French who will come in with almost the focus that revenge gives you can be really clinical sometimes, because you just focus on making your opponent play worse. So for me, this is mouthwatering. It's so interesting to see clash of styles. Ireland at the very top of the league in terms of width of play. They fling the ball to second receiver much more than the French. French the bottom of the league, but the French top of the league on kick distance. The French top of the league on line out and scrum efficiency. So you really have two polar opposites. Nothing could be better in rugby than having the two top nations of a comp squaring off when they play different ways. Those are all the things I'm looking for from this clash.
You put up a very interesting tweet yesterday where you put the top 4 teams in the world in sort of a matrix, South Africa North and New Zealand South, and then Ireland and France East and West, and you had arrows between all of them. Just explain that to me, because that's the 4 best rugby teams in the world. What was your thinking behind that?
Yeah, I don't know if we've ever had a clear top 4 in the world as we do now. Like, so clear, like so much space between 4 and the rest. So you can just look at these 4 teams, and then even within them, there is clearly a hierarchy. South Africa and Ireland are clearly above the French. The French, to get in, kind of have to win a game like this, to be honest. Like, this is the kind of game they need to win. And my arrows were pointing out that the French trouble the All Blacks. The Springboks own the All Blacks right now, but the All Blacks have the knack over Ireland. They just have this ability to beat Ireland. Ireland troubles us, but we play. We can play the French and the All Blacks well when it matters. And then between Ireland and the French, there is clearly a dominance for Ireland right now. So you factor that in, and it's a very interesting paradigm, because no team has a smooth sail. Every team has one team style that troubles them. And you can argue till the cows come home about why, and make excuses about we mostly play in Dublin. I'm just saying that's how it currently sits. All of it can be changed, and it changes in games like this. I've been reading the French press all week to see what they're talking about. So number one, they're saying Sam Prendergast, that's almost disrespectful to start him against us. We're going to ram the ball into his chest. Our knees are going to hit his knees. He's going to be gone, minute 5. Not dirty, just gone, because he's not up to it. Don't disrespect us. Number 2, they're saying that this is the turning of the tide. If there's going to be a match where the narrative is reset around Six Nations being Irish playground and the French struggling, L'Equipe and Midi Olympic, and some of the better commentators online are saying, okay, Galtier, put up or shut up. Because if the French domesticate us again, the Irish domesticate us again this time and emasculate us, we got to stop talking ourselves up and go back to the drawing board, and maybe we should tour New Zealand with a stronger team. But if they can get over the hump here, sail through, knock off, take the Irish scalp in Dublin a week before St. Patrick's Day, and then go into glory in the club rugby, which it looks like they're poised to do. Then sure, send a scrub team down to New Zealand and don't worry about it, because not only will the rankings change, the narrative around the Six Nations changes, and the power center of rugby in the Northern Hemisphere shifts. Am I overstating it because of one game? All I'm telling you is what the French are thinking. So you can take that with a grain of salt, or sel, as they say in French. On the French side, there are some players that have not been given their due because of the huge shadow that Antoine Dupont, amazing player that he is, costs. And one of those is Thomas Ramos, but other players as well. Damien Penaud, who was benched for attitude. You would think he's got a thorn under his saddle. And then you have a guy that it's been very difficult for anyone to keep this player in front of them, as we say. Like if your job is you're facing a wing and you say, just always be sure you're looking frontways into Brian Habana, how difficult that was because he just ran by you. So Louis Bielbiere is that kind of player. He just seems to be able to get on the outside, on the inside, beyond. anyone who tries to defend him. Another person we're going to point to is the phenomenal Pietro Movaka, who I thought had one of the duels of the ages against Ibn Etzebeth. It's rare that you have a hooker versus a lock type duel, but they really did. They dueled at rucks, they dueled at lineouts. At a significant amount of times in the quarterfinal in the Stade de France 2 years ago, where it was Ibn versus Pietro Movaka. And we've always looked at Ibn's game as one of his masterpieces, despite the card. But Movaka was similarly brilliant. He was one of the best performances I've seen when I took involvements and just tried to see how involved he was. So he's trouble, and he's up against who the Irish believe is their find of the century, Dan Sheehan. So if you believe in matchups and you think that it'll play out that way, rugby is kind of weird because sometimes it might be, instead of that, it'll be Caelan Doris versus, Thibaut Flamand, whatever. But if it does turn into a battle of the hookers, then I'm there for it because that's going to be box office. And then finally, there's a player that's not talked about very much in the Southern Hemisphere, and he's not even talked that much when you read the British press, the Irish press, and quite frankly, the French press, is Francois Crowe, a real hard nut on the flank. The French play flank sort of interchangeably, so they don't have a true open sider and a true blind sider. Boudahon, Crowe, and Aldrit are almost the same body style. They're all about, 6'3", 6'4". They're all about 115 kgs. They're just big bouncers, and they're all smart. But Crowe is in particular going to be up against Peter O'Mahony in Peter O'Mahony's final Irish home test. If you just wanted to see two guys battle in a dark alleyway, you might want to watch and pay for that and put a bet on it. So, Ireland has struggled when they lose the breakdown or territory. The French will cede to the territory. They'll be trying to camp Ireland back down deep. The long punting of Prendergast could be key there. He's got to have a good day with the boot, not just off the tee, but he's got to keep the French out. But the second part is going to be the breakdown. And so when you look at just back from injury, Doris, Josh van der Fleer, a former World Player of the Year, Peter O'Mahony, and Dan Sheehan, and Ty Byrne, I'm sorry, I should never forget him. That battle of the breakdown, and then off the bench, you have Conan, Baird coming in against the French breakdown crew of Jelonche, Jegu, Orado, Crowe, Movaka, Aldrit, and Boudahon. If you wanted to be a referee and have a tough day at the office, this would be the one you'd pick. It's going to be madness for the first 20, 25 minutes. And then Angus Gardner is going to have to sort out what he thinks is okay and what he thinks is a cardinal sin. If I had to bet on one thing in this match, besides it coming down to a kick made or a kick lost or missed, I'm going to say I'm sure there'll be a card. I'm sure of it. I'm positive there'll be a card.
You earlier this week you drew up a little spreadsheet and you divided the match into various aspects. Number one is home ground advantage, injuries, carry, chaos, etc., maul and attack. And based on that, you gave Ireland a +1 advantage, but you gave a very heavy weighting to the home ground advantage of +5, and then you also gave a +5 to France on attack, and that seems to be where you were taken on the most by some of our fellow pundits there. Are you still thinking the same now you've seen the team? Did your thinking change a little bit or not?
Yeah, I think Ireland is rebranded, not just at Leinster, but at national level. If you look at the tries scored and tries conceded, and I know they don't play in the same order, so Ireland has an easy game to come to close out probably, where they can run up that score. But you cannot get around it. They're scoring less tries, Ireland, and they're winning because they are not letting you score. At Leinster, they are unbeaten, even though they're scoring less because the Jacques Nienaber defense, which has not only affected Leinster, but it's gone up the chain and affected Ireland, has made it difficult. So it's a big bet, defense wins big matches. It's a big bet that Ireland's making that can stop this French juggernaut. Nobody stopped the French from scoring recently. I mean, that's not even really why England won at Twickenham. It was that the French just dropped 19, balls right to them. You saw, people that don't drop the ball, dropping the ball. So the attack structure still worked. Dropping balls when you've developed line breaks and the try lines are begging, that's not a failure in your system. That's a failure in the day dropping the ball. That's happened to any team. Any team you followed has had that day. So that would have not shaken the French belief in their attack systems. And it would set up this incredible cataclysmic clash, which is the best defense in the Six Nations, a defense that is vying with the Boks for being the best defense. And, the reason is quite obvious. The architect of the Bok defense is sitting in Ireland against an attack that just, on its day, when it's clicking, even in the quarterfinal, you saw what the Bok defense could not do against the French, which was keep them out of the try line. So, it's interesting to see this. We have a home and away, and usually the home team is the one who thinks, hey, I'll post a score. You see if you can match me. It's kind of the other way around. Ireland's welcoming the French to their stadium saying, you're probably going to score some. So we just have to minimize that, contain le petit général Dupont, minimize his effect, give him a cordon, I think. I think you'll see Josh van der Fleer and Caelan Doris and Ty Byrne forming a bit of a little circle around him and trying to see if he can operate within that circle, but cut off his supply lines. That's literally what the Boks did in the final part of the quarterfinal, and I do think Ireland will have learned from that. On the other side, I think the French would have looked at what I've looked at for 3 or 4 years now. Ireland struggles when they don't win the breakdown and they don't win territory. And so Ramos might be just ticking away and scoring threes, creating scoreboard pressure, hoping that Ireland has to throw caution to the winds and start throwing longer passes, and then you're going to see Damien Penaud, Beal Barry finishing off those kind of tries they score sometimes where everyone says that was against the run of play. But, you and I would say that was kind of predictable. Once you start tossing the ball around against the French teams, carnage can happen, and they score really quickly.
We're not going to really talk about the other teams, but you set up a sort of what you hope would happen this weekend as a rugby lover, not so much as an Irish fan or a French fan or anything for that matter. You prefer France to lose, England to win, and Scotland or Wales. How would you see these three games playing out so that we can have an actual final, if you want to call it that, next weekend?
If you want to have 15-15-15, the French have to beat Ireland, but not by a lot. And neither team is allowed to score lots of tries, right?
So let's get a bonus point, yeah.
So one try, losing bonus point for Ireland, French win, England goes ahead and does its job. Now you're all drawn on 15 points at the end of round 4, and you go into round 5 with each team playing a team they're expected to beat, but it'll all be about points differential, with the French going in with a better points differential, but England going to Wales and, theoretically being able to do that. Ireland playing Italy, absolutely able to do that. And then the French stopped by Scotland. They always have close games so that it contains them. And then what you're hoping for is that it literally comes down to final 20 minutes of each game, and one of those screen graphics where they show you as it stands, and every time someone scores, it changes. That would be brilliant.
All right. So what's your feeling? Is that going to happen, or do you think Ireland might just be able to put it off this weekend and win the championship? Third time in a row, first time it's ever been done.
I still think home counts for the most in the Six Nations. I still think that the fact that this game is situated in Dublin should give them the nod. My counterfactual to that is I still think it'll come down to kicks. And when it comes down to kicks, it could just be luck. It could just be Jack Crowley hitting a post and bouncing off, or Ramos doing one of his rare misses. It also can come down to errors. So that's that close between these two teams. I'll stick with my prediction that Ireland will win and therefore go back to back to back. And it would be a sweep, a different kind of sweep. because it will have been won, I think, in a harder way. Almost a harbinger to the box of how hard it is to go back to back to back, and how sometimes to win the third one, you have to look really different than you looked in the first two. So yeah, I think I'll go with that. I think England matches up with Italy very well almost always. Scores a lot of points. I think they'll take care of business. And I think Wales Renaissance, it's there, it's real. To have a coach that's that into you, who cries in the bus, who's got real attack plans, multi-layered, like Andre Pretorius pointed out so well. But I still think that's a bridge too far right now. But yeah, their pride is back, and they'll give Scotland a nice go for an hour. But of any prediction I made this whole season that I'm shaky on, it's the French-Ireland one. I really have no idea.
No, I agree.
Talk to me 30 minutes in, and I'll probably have a better idea. But I still think it'll come down to the final 5 minutes and luck. Contentious decisions by the referee, an injury, someone we haven't even talked about, someone from out of the blue, Ryan Baird or, Oscar Giroux, who knows? It could be anyone. But these teams are in a death match. They're in a spiral to face each other. And I do believe in revenge in sports. I actually do believe very much in what motivates players isn't what a lot of commentators say it is. I think spitefulness and feeling overlooked and feeling like you're being disrespected is a very powerful, animating, and unifying emotion in a team, which is why every coach tries to go there at some point. Us against the world. No one's talking about you. They're writing us off. It's powerful. And on the other side, the reason why Ireland could lose, and if I'm talking myself into Ireland will lose, it'll be because the game comes too early in Sam Prendergast's development. That could be the story.
One last question. One person that you and I both know will be watching this game with a hawk's eye is our esteemed director of rugby in South Africa, or head coach, sorry, not director of rugby anymore, Rassie Erasmus, who pulled a stunt yesterday and filmed the journalists. He posted that on YouTube, showing his point of view in the press conference. What would Rassie be looking for in this game between these two rivals that we're going to be playing in November?
Rassie is always sarcastic. He lives in the land of sarcasma. And so everything he says, I always go the opposite in my brain. I think he's really mastered that art, and so many people don't get it. So he praised the French 7-1 and the physicality. It's sarcastic. What he's saying is, don't try to pretend that your 7-1 is my 7-1. My 7-1 is the best 7-1. My 7-1 is the only 7-1. You're a copycat and you don't get it. You are in the Matt Williams school of thought that doesn't even understand what the 7 is. The 7 is all about the smallest forward, the smallest two forwards who can double up as backs if you need. It's all about hyperkinetic energy from your biggest players who don't have to worry. So Sia, Eben can empty tanks and not worry about going full 80. If Eben gets carded, then he can, but because then he's fresh. But this is the thing, is I don't know if the French team is set up that way. And secondarily, because they have this Dupont fixation where he has to stay on all the time and dominate the airwaves, I'm not sure that it's adaptive enough to the kind of players like Willemse, Sasha, Fassi, Faf, Kobus, Williams, that can really play all over the place, almost more like New Zealand players. I think the French are still very much in categories and specialized because of the demands of top 14. And you have this one extraordinary player who on his day is brilliant, but it's a bit like in basketball when you have one player pounding the ball on the ground the whole time, it makes everyone else stop. And so I still haven't seen that the whole of them is greater than the sum of their parts, to use a phrase that you and I debated this week.
Yeah.
It just feels like in Toulouse, they're able to get that out of him more. And at the national level, he just plays exactly what you think is going to be. And it's a bit too predictable. The one thing you cannot do against the Irish is be predictable. I think when I go back in time and remember the Loftus experiment with Tony Brown, even though it was extremely exhausting and we had to hang on in the end for sort of a tight victory, that first hour was some of the best rugby I've ever seen the Boks play in ages, because everything they did was completely off the book. And the Irish just couldn't catch up with it. I don't even think they even knew what they were looking at. They said, how are we having, Sia, Peter Steff on the wings, and we're having Lekkerbecks up the middle. And the only thing they were hanging on to was Kwacha's not really an 8. But I do think one danger of the French is how stubborn they are on tactics. And even when they do a 7-1, they miss the whole bloody point. And they end up just becoming big, a 901 kg bench.
All right, Harry, let's get cracking. We'll talk again soon to John Cardinelli about the Springbok alignment camp and what the thinking is behind the depth and everything else going towards 2027. Thanks, I'll talk to you soon.
Cool.
It's the Lekker Rugby Pod, only on Megaphone Rugby.